Sounds familiar? I'm sure you know it. The slow movement of Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata, composed in 1797, 98, and published in 1799. I'm playing it on my 1911 Bechstein grand piano. This is probably similar in its sound to what you're used to hearing in concert halls and on recordings, but this is not the sound Beethoven had in mind when he composed the piece. The familiar modern piano sound, that's a very generalised term, I know, developed from the mid-19th century, and for an age in which concert virtuosos such as Liszt filled concert halls across Europe and astonished large audiences with their dexterity. For this kind of civic setting, a virtuoso such as Liszt needed a big, heavy piano, built to be capable of making a very loud sound, filling a concert hall. For this, he needed an instrument whose strings were under huge tension, held together by a cast-iron frame. Liszt was a great admirer of Beethoven, whom he'd met as a small child. He often performed and taught Beethoven's sonatas, and even made an edition of them towards the end of his life. One of Liszt's students reported that he'd famously said, in a piano lesson, that the pianos of Beethoven's time, and he means the very early 19th century, were built too light. There's that familiar piece again, this time on a less familiar instrument. This is my Paul McNulty Viennese piano, a copy of a piano made in about 1795 by Anton Walter in Vienna. It's a modern copy of a state-of-the-art piano at the time Beethoven wrote his Pathétique Sonata, also in Vienna. We often refer to this as a forte piano to distinguish it from its modern equivalent. This then is the kind of piano for which Beethoven wrote the Pathétique, the kind of instrument that Liszt described as being too light. It certainly is very light. Compared to the piano Liszt played the best part of a century later, it's light in weight, it's light in construction, it's light in tone. Let's examine this a bit further. Obviously, this piano is much smaller than the modern one. It has only 5 octaves plus 2 notes instead of over 7 octaves on the modern piano. There are some cosmetic things that make no difference whatsoever. For instance, the keys are the wrong way round, with the white keys at the back and the black keys at the front. The pitch at which I played that extract from the Pathétique a few moments ago is also slightly lower than modern concert pitch. And for what it's worth, this particular piano has 5 legs rather than the 3 of a modern piano, none of which makes any aesthetic difference whatsoever. But some things make a huge difference compared to the modern instrument. On this forte piano, the strings are very thin and the hammers are very small, and they're covered with thin strips of leather rather than felt as on a modern instrument. And if you were to look inside it, you would be able to see the whole of the soundboard. It's not hidden under a cast iron frame because the strings are under less tension and can be held together just by the wooden frame of the instrument. So what's the result? Well, when I play a key, here's middle C for instance, the contact of the small hammer covered in its thin leather strips against a thin string made of steel in that case, at the lower end of the instrument, the strings are made of brass, produces a sound in the same way as a modern piano. A hammer hits a string and causes it to vibrate. But the tone quality on the forte piano is rather different. The pitch of each note appears immediately, unlike a modern grand. But also, unlike a modern grand, it dies away very rapidly. All of this gives a far greater clarity to the overall sound, completely in keeping with the style of classical music of the era of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. It's not a huge concert hall sound, but it can be pretty strong, as Beethoven shows us at the very opening of the Pathétique sonata, for instance. Beethoven was writing his early sonatas for a relatively small audience in an intimate salon-type setting. The forte piano and the setting are in perfect harmony. In this salon setting, the scale of the sound is more conversational than in a concert hall, and that's how most classical period music speaks, as if it were a conversation amongst friends. So we have subtle inflections of the voice, dialogue, and intimate scale. These are all the hallmarks of the classical musical language. Of course, one way in which Beethoven breaks that polite conversational mode is through shocking gestures, such as the very opening of the Pathétique that I played just now, in which he simply grips his listeners by the throat. It's as if he's deliberately trying to step outside the frame of 1799 into a brave new future. And you can almost imagine him agreeing with Liszt decades later that these pianos are built too light. 2020 is, as you may know, an important Beethoven anniversary year. Sadly, due to lockdown, many Beethoven celebrations have been cancelled or postponed until 2021. We hope that in Series 13 of Musicinnewmalden, we'll be able to give Beethoven some of the attention he deserves, better late than never, and to give you the chance to hear his music played on both period and modern pianos, so that you'll be able to judge for yourselves.